On December 27, 1941, the State Defense Committee of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics issued a top-secret decree numbered 1069SS. This document, printed on 3 pages of heavy paper, contained the personal signature of the chairman and was immediately dispatched to the leadership of the military and Chekist departments. Its official title clearly defined the task facing the state: on the organization of collection and verification points for Red Army servicemen who were in enemy captivity or encircled. This regulatory act laid a solid legal and organizational foundation for the creation of a large-scale administrative and verification system, which later became widely known as the Verification and Filtration Service of the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs. At the moment this decree was signed, the troops of the Western, Kalinin, and Southwestern fronts were actively engaged in offensive operations during the winter counteroffensive near Moscow. In the liberated territories, numerous groups of servicemen who had lost contact with their units due to various operational circumstances had broken out of encirclement on their own, or had been freed from enemy temporary holding camps by forward detachments, began to mass and uncontrollably exit into the rear areas of the Soviet troops. There was an urgent need to create a centralized mechanism to control these human flows. Before proceeding to a detailed analysis of the archival documents, figures, and logistical chains of this system, subscribe to the channel. This will provide direct assistance to the project's development and allow for the regular release of detailed historical and documentary investigations. Throughout the entire summer-autumn campaign of 1941, the defensive operations of the Red Army were accompanied by deep operational envelopments by the mobile formations of the Wehrmacht. Large groupings of troops were encircled in the areas of Bialystok, Minsk, Smolensk, Uman, Kiev, and Vyazma. According to the consolidated reporting documents of the main Directorate for the formation and manning of the Red Army, by December 1941, the total number of personnel officially listed as missing in action or in captivity exceeded 3 million people. The state management apparatus faced an administrative and defense problem of an unprecedented scale. It was required to solve 2 strategic tasks in the shortest possible time. First, to ensure state security by conducting a thorough verification of all returning persons, to identify embedded agents of German intelligence agencies. Second, to achieve the fastest possible replenishment of critical losses in manpower on the front line and in rear sectors. The country's economic potential was also under severe pressure, as the evacuation of industrial enterprises to the east caused an acute shortage of skilled labor in the coal, metallurgical, timber, and defense sectors of the national economy. Every unit of human resource had to be accounted for and efficiently distributed. The military legal framework of the Soviet Union at the initial stage of the war was built on the principles of maximum severity of responsibility for abandoning combat positions and surrendering. The 1939 Field Manual of the Red Army, known in staff documents as PU-39, contained no provisions whatsoever on the possibility of capitulation or the lawfulness of being in captivity. Any surrender was considered a military crime and treason against the motherland. Order number 270 of the People's Commissar of Defense from August 16, 1941, designated the status of all commanders and political officers who surrendered or removed their insignia as deserters. Their families were subject to state persecution, arrest, and deprivation of any forms of social support. However, the actual situation at the fronts showed that hundreds of thousands of rank-and-file soldiers found themselves encircled, not as a result of personal cowardice, but due to deep operational and tactical miscalculations by the High Command. GKO Decree No. 1069 SS transferred all functions for organizing the registration, isolation, and screening of former military personnel to the jurisdiction of the Directorate of Special Departments of the NKVD of the USSR, headed by Commissar of State Security 3rd Rank Viktor Abakumov. Under his direct control, the deployment of a network of collection and transit points and specialized camps in the deep rear began. Throughout January and February of 1942, 10 specialized camps for screening Red Army personnel were rapidly deployed in the rear military districts, based on the existing facilities of various departments. Among them, the ones with the highest throughput capacity were the Ostashkov camp in the Kalinin region, the Toropets camp, the Gryazovets camp in the Vologda region, the Yuzhsky camp in the Ivanovo region, and the Suzdal camp. The capacity of each of these facilities was calculated to simultaneously hold from 5,000 to 10,000 personnel. Topographically, the camps were located on the sites of former monastery complexes, vacated factory premises, or existing Gulag camp points. However, they had a completely independent administrative status and separate funding. The internal routine and engineering equipment of the territories were strictly regulated by joint directives of the NKVD and the People's Commissariat of Defense. A double row of barbed wire fences was erected around the perimeters of the camps, observation towers were installed, and control trace strips were equipped. The guarding of the facilities was entrusted to units of the convoy troops of the NKVD of the USSR. The logistical support for these camps was carried out according to supply norms approved by the secret NKVD Order No. 001744. According to this document, the daily food ration per screened individual included 600 grams of rye bread, 30 grams of cereal, 40 grams of meat or fish, as well as minimal amounts of fats, sugar, and vegetables. However, the actual delivery of food and medicines to the sites was constantly disrupted due to the general resource deficit and the overloading of transport arteries, which led to the deterioration of the contingent's physical condition. A detailed analysis of archival materials from the Administration of Special Departments of the NKVD and the main Directorate for the Formation and Manning of Troops allows us to identify one major discrepancy in the documents, indicating serious miscalculations in the planning and accounting of human resources at the initial stage of the system's operation. In March 1942, according to the official report of the head of the Ostashkov camp, a large train with servicemen who had escaped the Vyazma encirclement arrived at the facility. The accompanying lists from the People's Commissariat of Defense stated 12,400 personnel to be transferred for screening. However, the initial nominal registration and check-in conducted by the camp administration recorded only 9,800 individuals in the arriving contingent. The discrepancy of 2,600 people triggered an urgent official investigation by the Military Prosecutor's Office. During the investigation, it was revealed that during the train's journey along the Oktyabrskaya Railway, 3 battalions of former encircled troops were forcibly removed from the train by a written order from the Chief of the Front's rear services and directed to emergency work restoring destroyed tracks in the area of the major railway junction Bologoy. No changes were made to the centralized databases of the People's Commissariat of Defense, and the NKVD organs did not receive operational notification. This fact demonstrates the absence of horizontal coordination between the Army Command and the state security organs, which led to a temporary loss of control over the movement of thousands of servicemen. The screening and filtration procedure itself was a deeply detailed and strictly controlled multi-stage process. According to regulations, the screening period was supposed to last from 30 to 60 days. But in reality, due to the enormous influx of people, it was often extended to up to 6 months. Immediately upon arrival at the camp territory, every serviceman underwent mandatory sanitary processing, which included disinfecting uniforms in steam formaldehyde chambers, complete fingerprinting, and a detailed personal search. All surviving personal belongings, letters, uniform items, insignia, and documents were confiscated for the compilation of a detailed inventory. A separate screening filtration case was opened for each arrival. The main element of the case was a detailed questionnaire, Form Number 2, which contained 42 questions. The questions demanded a detailed chronological description of the entire period spent outside the control of Soviet authorities. The serviceman had to indicate the exact dates and geographical coordinates of the place of his capture or encirclement, the numbers and names of the German military units that conducted the capture, the exact names and addresses of the German prisoner of war camps where he was held, including stalags and oflags. It was also required to describe in detail the nature of the work performed, provide the surnames and positions of individuals from the camp administration, and record any instances of interrogation by German intelligence services. The main investigative work was carried out by operational groups consisting of investigators from the special departments. The screening was built upon 3 independent analytical lines. The first line involved conducting cross-interrogations of comrades in arms, individuals who served in the same platoon, company, or were held in the same POW camp were interrogated in strict isolation from one another. This allowed investigators to identify any chronological or factual contradictions in the testimonies. The second line included deep undercover work inside the camp barracks. A network of secret informants, recruited from among the former prisoners themselves, was actively infiltrated into the environment of those being screened, making it possible to record genuine sentiments and concealed biographical facts. The third line was based on the constant cross-referencing of questionnaire data with special centralized card files. These files contained information from captured German archives, lists of personnel from collaborationist formations, Vlasov units, Eastern legions, and graduates of German Abwehr intelligence schools. Throughout 1942, the system of screening and filtration measures underwent a qualitative reorganization, prompted by the changing scale and nature of military operations on the Soviet-German front. On December 29, 1942, the State Defense Committee adopted a new large-scale decree, number 2709 SS. According to this document, all previously existing collection and screening points were officially transformed into the NKVD USSR's screening and filtration camps. The overall management of this entire extensive structure was entrusted to a specially formed Department of Special Camps of the NKVD USSR, headed by Colonel Mikhail Shikin. By the summer of 1943, following the successful completion of the defensive and offensive stages of the Battle of Kursk and the beginning of the rapid liberation of left bank Ukraine, the total number of operational screening and filtration camps had increased to 22 independent units. The geographical distribution of the camp network shifted significantly westward, closer to the liberated industrial and coal regions of Donbass, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kryvyi Rih. The workload on the operational and investigative apparatus of the camps increased several-fold. Whereas at the beginning of 1942, one special department investigator was simultaneously handling no more than 10 or 15 screening cases, By mid-1943, this workload had reached a critical level of 40 to 50 cases per officer. This situation inevitably led to a serious increase in the detention periods of individuals under review within the camp zone and reduced the overall throughput capacity of the screening infrastructure. In August 1943, during the Donbass offensive operation, a second major planning error in the field of transport logistics emerged, as recorded in subsequent reports by the Central Directorate of Military Communications of the Red Army. During the liberation of the large industrial area of the city of Stalino, approximately 35,000 former military personnel and civilians of conscription age who had been in occupied territory for a long period emerged into the rear zone of the Southern Front. The Front Command, striving to quickly clear the immediate rear area, decided on the immediate mass dispatch of this group of people to rear screening and filtration camps located in the Volga region. Due to an incorrect assessment of the throughput capacity of rear railway junctions and a complete lack of preliminary coordination with the People's Commissariat of Railways, a large amount of rolling stock was hastily allocated for the transport. This rolling stock was entirely lacking the minimum supplies of food, drinking water, and medicine for the entire route. As a result of these actions, numerous trains with people were stuck on railway sections in the Kharkiv and Kupiansk area for 14 days, as dispatcher services gave absolute priority to military trains carrying ammunition and reinforcements for the advancing units. Due to this logistical miscalculation, 420 people lost their lives in the train cars from extreme exhaustion and outbreaks of gastrointestinal diseases, and another 2,100 people were completely incapacitated and in serious condition sent to field hospitals without ever reaching the final screening points. This emergency incident led to a strict investigation and the issuance of a joint NKVD and NKO Order number 00312, which introduced strict regulatory requirements for the organization of transport and food supply for all relocated contingents. In April 1943, important institutional changes occurred within the structure of the country's defense apparatus. On the basis of the Special Departments Directorate of the NKVD, the main Directorate of Counterintelligence, SMERSH, of the People's Commissariat of Defense of the USSR was formed. Leadership of the new structure was retained by Viktor Abakumov, who became directly subordinate to the People's Commissar of Defense, Joseph Stalin. Operational and investigative servicing of the verification and filtration camps was transferred to the purview of the 2nd Department of the GUKR SMERSH. This led to a significant change and tightening of the entire methodology for conducting verification measures. Counterintelligence specialists developed new, more in-depth methodological guidelines and instructions aimed at identifying persons concealing their true military ranks, as well as members of the German Field Gendarmerie, agents of the Secret Field Police, GFP, and active participants in the volunteer formations of the Third Reich, including the Russian Liberation Army under the command of General Vlasov and the Cossack Corps of General von Panwitz. Investigative groups in the camps began to apply methods of forensic analysis, including mandatory graphological examination, to verify the authenticity of signatures on surviving handwritten certificates and paybooks. Regular, detailed anatomical examinations of the subjects by medical commissions were also practiced to identify specific calluses from wearing German equipment, traces of removed tattoos with blood type, as adopted in the SS troops, or characteristic signs of wounds received during specific periods of fighting on particular sectors of the front. The offensive operations of the Red Army throughout 1944 led to the complete liberation of all pre-war territory of the Soviet Union and the advance of Soviet troops to the state border. During the successful execution of the Belarusian Iashi, Kishinev, Lvov, Sandomierz, and Baltic operations, Soviet formations captured and liberated hundreds of stationary prisoner-of-war camps established by the military administration of the Wehrmacht. The overall volume of personnel returning to the Soviet rear took on an avalanche-like character. The situation was further complicated in early 1945 when, following the Crimean Conference in Yalta, official agreements on the mandatory mutual repatriation of all Soviet citizens found in the zones of operation of Anglo-American troops in Europe were signed between the leaders of the Allied powers. To manage these gigantic human flows, by a decision of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR on October 23, 1944, a specialized directorate of the plenipotentiary of the USSR for repatriation affairs was formed. This structure was headed by Colonel General Philippe Golikov. Under his leadership, a colossal network of front reception and transit points and transit camps was deployed immediately beyond the state borders of the Soviet Union. These facilities were located in Germany, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Austria. In total, during the final stage of the war, 100 front verification and filtration points and 48 large stationary verification and filtration camps in the deep rear of the country were functioning. An in-depth cross-analysis of the reporting documents from the Commissioner's Office of the Council of People's Commissars for Repatriation Affairs and the monthly statistical summaries of the Department of Special Camps of the NKVD of the USSR for May 1945 reveals three major errors in accounting and planning which were a direct consequence of interdepartmental conflict between the Army Command and the internal affairs organs. The final official summary report from General Golikov, dispatched to the State Defense Committee on May 25, 1945, asserted that exactly 412,000 former Red Army servicemen had been received, registered, and sent for filtration processing from the zones of responsibility of the Western Allies onto the territory of Germany controlled by Soviet troops. At the same time, the official registration logs of the Department of Verification and Filtration Camps of the NKVD, which recorded the passage of people through border control checkpoints on the Oder River line and along the entire western border of the USSR, recorded the arrival of only 385,000 people. The statistical discrepancy amounted to 27,000 servicemen whose precise location and legal status remained entirely unaccounted for in centralized reports for more than 3 months. A special ministerial inspection of archival holdings conducted in August 1945 showed that this large group of 27,000 people had been forcibly detained by direct written orders from the commanders of the 1st and 2nd Belarusian fronts directly on the territory of Silesia and Pomerania. The people were consolidated into separate labor battalions and dispatched to work dismantling major industrial equipment from German factories and restoring mines. No information about this was transmitted to the central apparatus of the People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, and the individuals themselves did not undergo the mandatory primary investigative filtration procedures. This incident demonstrates the absolute priority given by the frontline generals to solving local economic and logistical tasks over nationwide instructions in the sphere of security and personnel accounting. Let us turn to a detailed statistical analysis of the results of the entire verification filtration system's activity over the entire period of the Great Patriotic War. These objective data are fully based on the final summary statements of the Department of Verification and Filtration Camps of the NKVD of the USSR and the Administration for Repatriation Affairs, which are currently held in the State Archive of the Russian Federation, Fond 9401 and Fond 9408. For the entire period from October 1941 to October 1st, 1945, a total of 1,836,000 Red Army servicemen who had previously been returned from captivity, liberated by the Allies, or emerged from encirclement on their own, passed through the Soviet verification filtration system. The actual distribution of this enormous mass of people, according to the results of the final decisions of the investigative commissions, completely refutes many concepts and requires detailed citation of specific archival shares and percentages for each category of personnel. Of the total number of privates and sergeants of the Red Army who passed through the sieve of the verification and filtration camps, from 90 to 92% successfully passed all stages of the verification without being subjected to any criminal, administrative, or disciplinary liability. From this group, about 43% of the total number were immediately reconscripted into the ranks of the active army and sent as part of marching reinforcements directly to the front to participate in combat operations. Another 24% were enrolled in the official personnel of the defensive construction and specialized work columns of the People's Commissariat of Defense. These units performed crucial tasks in restoring destroyed military facilities, bridges, airfields, and strategic communication lines in the front line and rear zones. Approximately 18% of the personnel, which mainly included individuals of older draft ages, as well as soldiers with severe wounds, concussions, or disabilities, were officially demobilized from the Army and sent to their places of permanent pre-war residence for immediate inclusion in the work of restoring the civilian sector of the economy. About 5% were centrally transferred to the disposal of key industries through the system of state-organized recruitment of labor reserves for work in the coal mines of Donbass, Kuzbass, and at the metallurgical plants of the Urals. The category of persons subjected to various repressive or disciplinary measures in the course of the filtration includes the remaining 8 to 10% of the total number of the verified contingent. About 4% of the total number of privates and sergeants were, by decision of the verification commissions, sent to penal companies and penal battalions at the front. The official legal basis for such decisions were facts firmly established during interrogations and confirmed by witnesses of personal cowardice during capture, voluntary abandonment of personal small arms or combat equipment on the battlefield, without exhausting all objective possibilities for resistance, as well as short-term service in the unarmed internal camp police, without committing recorded serious crimes against other prisoners or the civilian population of occupied territories. These individuals received a lawful opportunity to fully restore their legal and social status by demonstrating courage in performing the most dangerous tactical tasks on the front line as part of penal units. Direct arrest by the counterintelligence organs of SMERSH and the special departments in the camps was applied to about 4% of the total number of filtered servicemen of the rank and file and sergeants. This category included individuals against whom irrefutable documentary evidence or direct testimony from numerous witnesses confirming their voluntary and conscious defection to the enemy side had been collected by operational and investigative means. This included persons who voluntarily enlisted in the punitive detachments of the SD, the German Order Police, the Eastern Legions of the Wehrmacht, who personally participated in the execution of other Soviet prisoners of war and civilians, as well as persons who underwent training and were infiltrated into Soviet territory as agents of German intelligence organs. Their investigative cases were mandatorily sent for consideration by the military tribunals of the fronts, military districts, or the Special Council of the NKVD of the USSR. As the main punitive measures against them, confinement in the corrective labor camps of the Gulag for long terms of 10 to 25 years was applied. As for persons who headed large collaborationist formations, served in the enemy's punitive organs, or personally participated in mass executions, the supreme measure of social protection was applied, leading to their complete physical elimination and removal from the lists of the living. However, regarding the Red Army officer corps who found themselves in enemy captivity due to various circumstances, state policy and the departmental filtration system were significantly stricter, more suspicious, and more differentiated. In total, during the war years, over 120,000 officers of all ranks and positions, from junior lieutenant to lieutenant general inclusive, underwent strict inspection. Of this number, only about 60% were fully reinstated in their military ranks, had their personal documents, party cards, and state awards returned, after which they were sent for further line service in active units or enlisted in the reserve of the main personnel directorate of the People's Commissariat of Defense. Approximately 25% of the inspected officers were deemed by the commissions as unfit for reinstatement in the Army's personnel due to the presence of dubious and unclarified circumstances of their capture or a complete lack of objective possibility to confirm their worthy behavior in enemy camps through the testimony of others. They were officially discharged from the armed forces without the right to wear military uniforms and sent to work in the defense industry as part of special workers' battalions without the restoration of their officer status. The remaining 15% of the officer corps were officially arrested by counterintelligence agencies and suffered severe criminal punishment under Article 58 of the Criminal Code of the RSFSR for treason to the motherland in the form of voluntary surrender or active collaboration with the administration of enemy camps. Such a high percentage of convictions among the command staff was explained by the strict requirements of the Soviet military oath and military regulations, which placed an absolute obligation on the commander to lead his assigned unit until its complete loss of combat capability and categorically excluded the possibility of personal surrender to save one's own life. Any officer was considered by the state as a bearer of secret information and a representative of state authority, whose responsibility before the law was many times higher than that of an ordinary soldier. Summarizing the strict material, technical, organizational, and operational analytical outcome of the functioning of the USSR NKVD's verification filtration system during the war years, it is necessary to view this institution as a specialized and highly effective mobilization tool of a totalitarian state operating under conditions of total military confrontation. This system was never guided by abstract categories of individual morality, ethics, or justice. It evaluated vast human masses exclusively from the pragmatic standpoint of their military political reliability and maximum economic usefulness for the defense complex of a warring country. The main tasks set by the highest political leadership for the NKVD Department of Special Camps and the SMERSH counterintelligence agencies was fully completed within the established deadlines. Huge flows of people were successfully catalogued, inspected, cleansed of hostile elements, and redistributed in the interests of the front and the rear industry. The filtration machine was able to return over 1,500,000 trained and organized men to the state's military and economic circulation, which significantly compensated for the most acute shortage of manpower in the final stage of the war. At the same time, the deep bureaucratization of all procedures, chronically low levels of logistical and sanitary support at most checkpoints, frequent errors in tracking movements, and the initial presumption of guilt regarding persons who had been under enemy control led to large-scale consequences. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet servicemen who honestly fulfilled their military duty at the front and ended up in captivity solely as a result of large-scale operational catastrophes in 1941 and 1942 were subjected to prolonged administrative pressure, temporary deprivation of civil rights, and harsh detention conditions that were close in their physical parameters to those of corrective labor camps. The described model of state mobilization clearly demonstrated its highest administrative and resource efficiency in the critical conditions of waging war. However, the price of achieving this efficiency was expressed in a profound infringement of the legitimate interests and rights of hundreds of thousands of the state's direct defenders, whose personal loyalty and devotion to the motherland were tested by methods of total suspicion, isolation, and investigative pressure. This archival investigation is hereby concluded.